African history professor or teacher, Professor Hicks. And it's great to be back under our original umbrella of history, African history specifically. As I have mentioned before, we're going to be jumping around a lot. I will be returning to this topic again later on. But today we're going to go right and deep dive into the history of that the first Americans were Africans. Yes, the first American were black people. And as you know, if you've been following me on this topic, we are going to be using documented evidence from Dr. David Imhotep, who is an ancestor now. May all praises do be to him. And this is the title of his book. For those who might be interested in purchasing it. Particularly, I'm focusing on my subscribers tonight because they've been honest enough and I guess, I don't want to say dedicated, but interested enough to take me up on this subject. And kind of moving forward, we're going to be moving away from the political aspect of this channel to back to the historical. So I want to warn you that I'm going to be using some terms today. I'm going to try to define these terms to you before we begin or as we're moving through it. And I also want to warn you that this might become a little monotonous today. If you turn away, I have no problem because you can always turn back when you're not, well, when you're more inspired to listen to this particular video or broadcast. But I'm going to be doing some reading. And I promise you, as I am reading, interspersed with my reading, I will try to define and give the definitions. But those who are really interested, and those are the ones I'm really talking to, you should really take and purchase this book. It's really groundbreaking. And when it was first published, it just blew the top off of many scholars because the work is so evidence-based. Particularly, the first chapter is all evidence-based, as Dr. Imhotep will tell you. And the second chapter, moving into the second and other chapters, it gets more peer-reviewed based, even though that's evidence in fact. But some of it is not grounded in fact. Lots of evidence, a lot of articles, but a lot of collaboration of information. So he readily admits that chapter 2 is a chapter that is gathering, corroborating evidence to come to a conclusion, which is something you have to do on your own. I am not here to convince you of this. I love for you to accept this information, but this information has already been accepted through most of the scholarly community. So those who don't know this information are mostly laymen, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person. But it is important as Africans that we know this information and that I get it out to those who might be interested in concepting or this thinking, or as my lovely word I love, commiserating over this evidence. So hopefully that you're one of those persons. And if you are, you must spread the word. Because this is our history that has been repressed and denied for hundreds of years in this country, particularly in the United States. And that's why I'm here tonight, to try to set the record straight. So let's dive into it. There's a couple of terms I'm going to be using, but the most frequent one for this particular reading is going to be in the realm of genetics. Genetics. Yes, Africans in America have been given, I should say, genetic evidence has been submitted to this. There has been craniometric evidence, biological evidence, archaeological evidence, and finally, anthropological evidence. All of them are in this book. So let's move forward. The first term that's going to be important to you is haplogroup. So I'm going to briefly tell you what that is. I also should mention that hopefully we have time to go through a few slides And these slides were created by me for my college course. And hopefully they are helpful today to this discussion. So one of the terms that in genetics we use is called haplogroups. A haplogroup is a large genetic population group that shares a common ancestor through a single line of descent, either parent or father's line. And when we say maternal, we mean mother, and when we say paternal, we mean father. You're going to hear another term called mtDNA. That simply means mitochondrial DNA. What is that? Mitochondrial DNA is the DNA that is passed through your mother. Fathers cannot pass this type of DNA, only mothers. This type of DNA is mostly used in these types of studies because the mother lineage cannot be changed. As you know, some of our dads could be here and not be here. But the mother and you will always share the same mitochondrial DNA. So with that said, we're going to move forward and briefly go back from the beginning. The evidence suggests that African people moved into the Americas well before the Asian Mongolian group, as we know as being the Native Americans. They are recognized through their phenotype, that is their epicantral fold on the eyes. They are also recognized through media, movies as such, and documentaries as being the derogatorily called dime store Indians. We have seen these types of Indians in cowboy and Indian movies, and this group of people have been known historically, or I should better say have been said historically, to be the first people here in America. That is not true. That is completely false, and over the last 5 years has been debunked in most history books. The last word on that subject is that any books created in the 20th century, you will find no evidence and no authors writing on that anymore. If you go back to the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century, you will find plenty books that will refute my assertion that black people were the first African. But no more, because Dr. David Imhotep's book and others with it, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Edward Morgan, and plenty other historians have concluded factually through much evidence that Africans were the first ones in America. These sub-Saharan people who left Africa, crossing the Straits of Gibraltar, that is in Spain, there's a very small space between Africa and Spain, which is probably about 1,000 miles long, but very, very short. This group, crossing the Straits of Gibraltar into Europe, then heading north and east, are known by several names. One of those names is Khoisan, the Khoisan, or the Khoikhoi, or the Aurignacian, Cro-Magnon, and later Grimaldi. Please remember those names. One more time: the Khoisan, the Khoikhoi, Aurignacian, and the Cro-Magnon, and later the Grimaldi. Until recently, it was assumed that earliest dates for haplogroup N genes were in Eastern Eurasia. This view has changed recently as a result of the extraction and examination of ancient mitochondrial DNA from Cro-Magnon skeletons, dating to the Aurignacian period. Cro-Magnons are said to be the ancestors of today anatomically modern white people. That is also something that has been proven through some evidence, but it is still scholarly and still being said, debated, and sometimes I might have to even say getting close to being proven as something factual. These skeletons were able to reveal mitochondrial DNA dating to the Aurignacian period. The archaeological evidence indicates that anatomically modern humans replaced Neanderthals during the Aurignacian period in Europe 30,000 years ago. So 30,000 years ago, the species that we know as Neanderthals were replaced by the Aurignacian period, which is described as a tool-bearing period, a period where culture and certain tools that would be considered modern were brought to Europe. The Khoisan Aurignacian civilization appears to have expanded from Africa west to Africa east. The founders of this culture from Africa, some researchers have argued that the Aurignacian culture was introduced to Europe from Africa. So this Aurignacian culture or period was introduced to Europe from Africa. They based this conclusion on the fact that its toolkit was foreign to the Mousterian type, and the culture appears in a mature form throughout Europe from France to Central Europe. What do they mean by mature? Meaning that this Aurignacian period or this culture did not have any antecedents or precedents, that when it came into Europe, it was fully blossomed. Now, most cultures you find artifacts leading from primitive to more modern, leading archaeologists to think and believe that this particular culture or this particular artifact or this particular people were developing along with their tools. In other words, they went from primitive tools to more modern tools. The classic Aurignacian culture probably began in Africa, crossed the Straits of Gibraltar into Spain, and to Iberia, which is the old name, ancient name for Spain, and expanded eastward across Europe. So they came up to the Gibraltar, and they went eastward back towards and through Europe. Now, eastward would mean that they're going back towards probably Africa or the Eastern European steppes. During the brief ice age, which is called an interstadial period, so you have glacial periods and interstadial periods. When you hear the word interstadial, that means it's a warming period, a period where the ice is melting now. People are starting to move about because the ice is melting. Plants are growing, and the climate is cooling. Or should I say the climate is warming. This interstadial warming period was experienced in Europe 40,000 years ago. The Khoisan entered many European landscapes from Africa during this period. Some of these areas were inevitably valleys. In one of these European valleys, one of the Khoisan mini-groups, several thousand of years later, was labeled the Yurok, an African subgroup. So here, Dr. Imhotep is saying that the Khoisan group settled in a European valley. Most civilizations have been begun in valleys. Most civilizations start in valleys. A quick example would be the Nile Valley. No matter where you go in geographical history, all civilizations start by river valleys. So these Khoisan people went into this river valley, lived there for quite some time, and then moved on, died out, were extinguished, or whatever it might have been. After leaving their valley, sailing west in boats, sailing west and landing in the Americas, they were now called Native Americans. So this subgroup of Africans called the Yurok maybe no longer were presenting the African phenotype, meaning the pug nose, prognathic mouth, dark skin, but some climatic and environmental changes are having an effect on that part of their bodies, and now we're called Native Americans. When you hear me say Native Americans, I'm mostly talking about the people who we refer to in cowboy and Indian movies. For reasons unknown, these people packed all that they had and began their journey west into the Americas, where they settled. Eventually, some of them headed south, meaning into South America. The Yurok specifically stated they ended their long journey at the furthermore southern border of South America. In my slides, I'm going to try to show you that, and that place is called Tierra de Fuego, at the tip end, the southernmost end of South America. There may have been some African Fuegians already there, okay, because remember, all humanity started in Africa. All humanity started in Africa. That humanity was called Africans. Therefore, Africans were the first humans on the planet Earth. After those Africans began to change, began to mutate in certain areas as they left that environment, they began to people the earth. From those original Africans, the first humans and the only humans, other people developed. Asians, Melanesians, Australoids, native people as we know them, Chinese, and eventually Europeans. No ancient mass graves or weapons have been found in Tierra de Fuego. The assumption is that there was no evidence of violence among these ancient Africans and Fuegians, nor against them from outsiders. What does that mean? That means that these people moved about, stayed there, left, some stayed, some left, but it wasn't because of any type of warfare or mass extinction or mass migration. That is why I believe in 1830, when this picture was found of the Fuegians, that some of them were still there. People move for basic reasons. They're either pushed out or something pulls them. The first people in the southernmost region of South America were dubbed the Fuegians. The evidence established in that the Fuegians the evidence established is that the Fuegians from South America are genetically connected to the Khoisan people of sub-Saharan Africa. The Fuegians were related to the Khoisans because of the Y chromosomes. Y chromosomes are only carried by the male. Fuegians 100 to 400 before present carried haplogroup A1. Haplogroup A1 is an African haplogroup. We can now safely say that they were the same people, since they carried the same haplogroup, who were the original people called the Khoisan people. We analyzed, and this is Dr. Imhotep talking, we analyzed the literature on ancient DNA of Paleo-Americans. Paleo means ancient. It was found that the Paleo-Americans carried mitochondrial DNA belonging to M macro haplogroup, meaning a large group, and Y chromosome aura, males. Paleo-Americans were Khoisans, that first group who migrated out of Africa. The Khoisan were the Cro-Magnon people who introduced the Solitrean cultures into Spain and North America. These founding indigenous Americans came to America in boats from Africa, which was the only place Paleo-Americans could sail from to reach the Americas during the last ice age. Now, during the last ice age, there was an ice bridge and ice mountains blocking the Siberian Passage, which was known previously before being debunked to come from the Clovis people. In other words, the Clovis people, who are said to be the first people to enter America, said to also be Asian/Mongolian, were said to have come across this Bering Strait during this ice age, which we know could not have happened because the ice blocks were more than a mile high. They couldn't do it. So this theory has been totally debunked. Most all scholars have rid themselves of the Clovis theory, which stated that 9,400 years ago, the Asian Mongolian group crossed the Bering Strait during the Ice Age and came into America. The Fuegians were related to the Khoisan because of the Y chromosomes they carried. Fuegians 100 to 400 before present carry haplogroup A1, which we've already said is an African haplogroup. So we can now safely say that they were the same people. The same people. We can see the origins of the Khoisan people here. And they say, in quotations, we analyzed the literature of the ancient DNA of Paleo-Ancient Americans. It was found that the Paleo-Americans carried mitochondrial DNA belonging to the M macro haplogroup and Y chromosome R. The Paleo-Americans were Khoisan, African. The Khoisan was the Cro-Magnon people who introduced Soltrian cultures into Spain and North America. Now, there's been some debate amongst white scholars that Cro-Magnons look like them. That has also been destroyed. Because when you look at the cranial structure, the morphology of the Cro-Magnon, which they have many skeletons, it looks African and has been measured to be African. These founding indigenous Americans came to America in boats. Yes, in boats. And we'll show you a map that shows you that it's easier to get from Africa to America than it is from Asia across an ice, miles high type of structure that no human can pass through. And one more time. These founding indigenous Americans came to America in boats from Africa, which was the only place Paleo-Americans, ancient Americans, sailed from to reach the Americas during the last ice age. Remember, you can't walk across ice. Mongolian Asians or Asian Mongolian people could not have done that, no matter how much they say we were the original people. There are no skeletons, no archaeological evidence that date back at that period that shows that Mongolian Asians, their brachiocephalic heads, which means rounded short, were present in the Americas then. They did come, but they came much later. To finish with the DNA evidence of the first people in the Americas, the Chinese must be mentioned. Why? The old Clovis theory maintains that the first Americans were Chinese, Asian, Mongolian, same thing. Well, here we will expose who the first Chinese really were. Chinese scientist Professor Zhen Li agrees with other Chinese scientists, Wang and Lai, that the first Chinese had their roots and originated in Africa. Yes. When you see the Khoisan people in Africa today, they're still there. And you might have seen them in South Africa movies or films or documentary. They have the epicanthal fold. Many African Americans and Europeans think that that is something that they gave us, that Native Americans gave that to us. But we were here before them, and that is something that originated, that particular phenotype originated in Africa. Since we were the first people on the planet, and Africa being the birthplace of humanity, that is easy and logical enough to know that if the Chinese came after the Europeans, developmental wise as a species, and Africans came before the Europeans, meaning Africans first, European, and then Asian, and those Africans had the epicanthal fold, it is logical to conclude that the Chinese received that particular phenotype from us, Africans. The current Y chromosome evidence suggests multiple early migrations of modern humans, multiple early migrations of modern humans from Africa via Southeast Asia to East Asia. Southeast Asia to East Asia. After the initial settlements, the northward migration, meaning we moved from South America up, going towards North America now, to where we live, during the Paleolithic, meaning the ancient lithic is stone. The ancient Stone Age shaped the genetic structure in East Asia. So how does this particular age shape a genetic structure? It could be several ways. It could be by intermarriage. It could be by intercourse. It also could be environmentally and climatically, but we'll talk about that later. Once it became generally accepted that modern humans evolved recently in Africa, the times and routes of migration to East Asia remain controversial. Yes, because now you have this new evidence showing that Clovis has been debunked, African mitochondrial DNA coming up from the south to the north, being shaped into a different structure now through intermingling or what have you. We're not sure. But we know that that particular genetic structure or marker comes from Africa. The migration history of haplogroup DM174, African, is most mysterious. By now, we have known little about the origins, excuse me. By now, we have known little about the origins and the dispersal of this haplogroup. There's still much research going on. This haplogroup was derived from Africa. That part we know. It's called DE-M1 and is associated with a short, black, Asian physical type. Haplogroup E and D, brother haplogroups to the DE-M1. Now I know this gets a little crazy, but we're going to come to some logical conclusion with this. Stay with me. While haplogroup E was carried westward towards us to Africa by the tall people or the tall black people, haplogroup D might have been carried eastward to East Asia by the short black people. Okay. Now, to understand short and tall as it relates to development of a species, certain species grow shorter, certain species grow taller based on their environment and where they are. We're going to talk about that later on. But that goes into something called Glosier's Law and Allen's Law. Don't have time to do that today, but we will. Now we're going to switch one foot to another. Now we're going to go to something a little more stronger, because most people know about blood types. We shall now deviate from the chromosomes and haplogroups to the blood types. First, we see a quote from the Smithsonian Institute. The species that you and all other living beings on this planet belong to is Homo sapien, wise man. He is the last of the developmental species, or I should say the second to last, because now they've got a new species over the last 100 years called the Homo sapien sapien, the wise man. During a time of dramatic climate change, 200,000 years ago, Homo sapien evolved from in Africa. So meaning that this anatomically modern human who looked like us, Homo sapien, evolved in Africa first. He was in Africa first. Very important to remember. The type O blood is said to be the oldest blood and shows a connection to the hunter-gatherers culture. What are hunter-gatherers? These are the people that you learned about in high school that were nomadic, followed the herds to hunt, gather food, and eat. They were not people who were sedimentary or sedentary. Sedentary means that you're farmers, you're settled, you're growing, you're making crops. Hunter-gatherers are nomadic. They're moving place to place, following the herds of animals, whatever they were, but moving from place to place. Hunter-gatherers also were people unlike the sedentary people in that they were more crude in their living and in their toolkit, meaning what they carried with them to survive. Type O blood is said to be the oldest blood and shows a connection to the hunter-gatherers culture. The scholar also raises the question, if the oldest Homo sapiens were the oldest culture, would not Africans be the oldest hunter-gatherers as well? Logical, of course. O-negative blood, the oldest blood in the world, are called universal. Why? Because meaning that they can be transfused to almost any patient in need. So O-type negative blood from Africans, since it was the first blood, can be used to transfuse to almost anybody. We see that even the Smithsonian Institute says Africans were the first Homo sapiens, the first people. Hence, would not the first people have the first blood? Logic, folks. And one that is universal additionally. Two scientists, Coco and Dibert, anticipated finding similar blood groups distribution in the Asians and Indian population, which would further support the widely held theory that Native Americans, those, I hate to keep referring to them in this way, but the cowboy Indian type, had immigrated to the Americas from northern East Asia. They were surprised to find that, to the contrary, the blood group distributions of East Asians and American Indians, their sample groups were quite different. They didn't have the O-type blood. They did not have the O-type blood. Therefore, we see that the type O blood is the universal blood donor because it is the oldest blood type on the planet. Just like Africans are the oldest people on the planet. This also means that this type can be transferred to almost any patient in need. Would not the oldest blood type logically belong to the oldest people? I hope my audience is still with me and taking something from this, because you, if you are African, were the first Americans. If the oldest descendants of the universal blood donors were type O blood, said Coca and Dibert, and the American Indians had a very high likelihood of being the universal red cell donor, would it then be logical to say that the American Indians have a very high likelihood of being of African descent? Yes. Dr. Imhotep is saying, look at the movies. Look at Native Americans in certain parts of the United States. Go back to the old movies like I did 10 years ago and research. I went back to the John Wayne movies And what did I see? I saw Native Americans with long hair, but very dark skin, pug nose, some of them straight, but dark skin with the epicantral fold. They did not come. You can't go to China and find anyone in China with dark skin in this period, at that period. So how did they get black like that? Look at some Native American movies and pictures today when you get through watching me, and ask yourself, if they were truly East Asian, how did they get black like that? Because when they got here, they saw Africans. And like most people, they had intermingling. A Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History author wrote, if the oldest Homo sapiens were the oldest culture, would not the Africans be the oldest hunter-gatherers as well? Zero negative blood cells are called universal, meaning they can be transferred to any patient in need. So Africans, the most ancient people on earth, have zero negative blood. Period. All right, we get into the end of this, all right? If you're still with me, thank you. If you're not, c'est la vie. This is for people who are really serious. That's why my next class, I believe I'm going to announce it to my subscribers, because I know this information is very difficult for everyone to concept, particularly if you're not in the realm of reading and looking at this history already, previous to my coming on with this. What is the universal blood donor? People with type O negative blood are called universal donors because type O negative blood is compatible with any blood recipient type. The mystery of human blood types. The human body naturally makes antibodies that, well, now this is going to be a little difficult. The human body naturally makes antibodies that will attack certain types of red blood cell antigens. For example, people with type A blood have A antigens on their red blood cells and make antibodies that attack B antigens. People with the type B blood have B antigens and on their blood cells and make antibodies that attack A antigens. So, type A people can't donate their blood to type B people, and vice versa. People who are type AB have both A and B antigens on their red blood cells and therefore don't make any A or B antibodies, while people who are type O, us, have no A or B antigens and make both A and B antibodies. Now, I know that sounds a little confusing, but basically, most people know you can't have a blood type A and donate to a person with B. I think that's the best and most simplest way to explain that paragraph. So briefly restating the above content from the Smithsonian, Lawn Laboratories and Irwin Wayman, Africans were the first people on the earth. They had the oldest blood, O negative. That is the oldest blood. And believe it or not, Africans are the universal blood donors. To end this discussion, disclosed later in this work, will be the study of the celebrated geneticist Luca Cavalli-Sforza. Now, Luca Cavalli-Sforza compiled a book. It's about that thick. For those who go back to my original broadcast, I believe you can find it. I showed you the book. It's the genetic Bible. Scientists yesterday and today use that in their genetic studies. If you've had your genealogy done, trust me, you mention that name to your genealogist, and they will tell you, yes, this is the Bible. Luca Cavalli-Sforza, he wrote in History and Geography of Human Genes that genetically speaking, white skin was not in existence before 3000 BC. I'm going to say that again. Luca Cavalli-Sforza, he wrote in his history of geography of human genes that genetically speaking, white genes was not in existence before 3000 BC. Folks, that is just around the corner. We just passed 3000 BC. That is how recent white folks have been on this planet. Now, I'm going to be doing a slideshow on natural selection to give you a kind of overview, because to go into this will be too deep to understand. To give you an overview how natural selection selected all of us to be who we are today, and more specifically how natural selection gave white people white skin. This is another genetic nail in the coffin concerning the blood type issue, as well as the Clovis theory. If you need to go further in this line of study and find out more about the biology of skin color and how the different people's skin color came to be, just Google the following. Glosier's rule, Gloger'(S) rule, Allen's rule, Allenrule, Allen's rule, and thirdly, Bergman's rule, Bergman rule. These three scientists are the foremost noted scientists who talks about genetic structure, development, skin color, morphology, and their rules are used today in scientific studies. Now I'm going to read to you a quick 9 to 10 item to more or less summarize what we just said. Number one, more evidence of Africans in America. Moving back from biology to history, Dr. Clyde A. Winters, now this is the guy that deciphered the Bai script and the Mayan language and writing, and the Mandi language as well. He has a channel, you can check into him. It's called Dr. Winters, Dr. Clyde A. Winters. He's a PhD, an African American from Chicago, who has deciphered African, unknown to that point, scripts. He provides 12 points to consider about the first Africans or first Americans in their journey from Africa to the Americas. Number one, Australians represent out of Africa population that settled in Asia. The Australians represent the out of Africa population that settled in Asia. Yes, the first Asians were not Chinese people, they were African. Ice separated much of South America east to west. East to west. The first Americans appear in Brazil, Chile, and then Argentina, at least by 30,000 BC. Much, much, much later, before the 9,400 BC Clovis period. Craniometric, meaning the skull measurements. Evidence shows that the first Americans looked like Africans, not Amerans, not Native Americans. Craniometric evidence also shows Asia was dominated by the Australian population until the rise of the Samoan, when the Melanesian people appear in an area. Beringer was still under ice at that time. So the Melanesian people might be like the Polynesian type people, but still having those African features, but lighter skin, based on climatic and environmental changes. Number 6, Melanesian people, Melanesian type, I should say, reached the East Asian mainland by 3000 BC, long after Africans had settled Latin America. Between 15,000 and 12,000 BC, we see numerous Africans in populations of Mexico, Brazil. Statues dating to this period have even been found off the Yucatan coast in the Caribbean. Number 8, the first Americans did not look like the Australians or modern Amerans. These were the Khoisan people, the short Khoisan people. Iconography, or meaning symbols, of pre-classic people like the Cheria, the Ocas, and other groups of Negroes, not Amerins, are found in South America. Almost done here, folks. Amerins, or these Native Americans, groups not associated with African slavery or not associated with African slaves, carry African genes because they developed from the Africans. The Maya carry African Y chromosomes. What I found surprising, many of the Mayan folks who I know, and I know a few, I've sought them out, claim that their ancestry is African. Yes, there's still Mayans living, many of them. I have 3 very good friends who are Mayan who give me no argument. And they were older than the Aztecs, remember. The Mixtecs and present-day Mexicans. The Mayans were first. And they admit to their African ancestry. And concluding, we have traced the Anu Twa. The Anu Twa is another group of the Khoisan. We have traced the Anu and the Twa DNA coming to North America from 2 directions. Take your pick. Either from the northern part where the Eskimos, because the Eskimos are also the ancestors or the present person, but their ancestors were African. Coming 2 ways. Let's go that again. Coming to North America 2 ways. Take your pick. From Africa by way of South America on boats, or later north from Scandinavia by way of Canada. Now, we didn't talk about that today, but that is the other way. That is where the Eskimos come from. Their mode of transportation when traveling over water was the papyrus reed boat. Look that up. Papyrus reed, Papyrus reed boat, which predated all wooden boats. Now, I had mentioned that my time spent in Africa, I was able to see monumental boats that the Egyptians used to carry foodstuffs, animals, and different things. One boat I saw, giraffes were carried on this boat to go to China because one of the pharaohs, I believe in the 18th dynasty, gave Chinese folks, who they were trading with all the time, a giraffe as a present. So just think about a giraffe on a boat, how large that boat had to be. Okay, folks. I'm going to put the book down. I'm going to try to go to my slideshow. We're almost at an hour. That's okay today. I don't care. If you're still with me, God bless you. If you aren't, I understand. But this is a scholarly discussion, not a political one. And hopefully you are with me still. Now let's see if I can get up let's see if I can find my slideshow. If I could, you're going to be lucky. If not, we aren't going to be able to get there. Excuse me. Slideshow 2. Is it there? It should be there. Oh, well, maybe I can't find it. It's not a problem because we've done enough today that I can bring to show you that slideshow tomorrow. So it's not a problem. It was normally there. I don't see it. Folks, give me a second. I think I might have it. All right, let's see if that's it. Yes, that's it. That was it. And I don't see why it's not coming up. Let's see if I can try this. Okay. Let me close. Forgive me, folks. Let's see if we start. Okay. Well, I'm going to save this slideshow for tomorrow, but I wanted to give you some pictures of some of the things we talked about today to reinforce But we are 50 minutes in. I think an hour is pretty good. For those who are interested, of course, only if you're interested. I'm not looking for crowds in this type of discussion. I will appreciate it if you subscribe and leave some comments on this if this was interesting to you. Some questions so I might be able to answer them. Tomorrow when we begin, I should have my slideshow ready. Don't know where she is, but she's hiding down there. And I'm sure by tomorrow I'll find her. She's there. She's in there somewhere. And I'm sure I'll find her. And we'll talk more about this. In the interim, I'm going to thank you for your patience if you're there. And listen to I try to go slow and listen to this. So I need you to listen to this lecture again. But tomorrow, I'm going to not bore you with so much of the lecture, but I'm going to show you some slides that I think you will find quite interesting. Okay? And with that said, I'm going to say Ashe. Have a wonderful night. And keep watching, subscribe, and like. Please send your comments.